Good morning, everyone. This is Jess from the Chamber. We're excited to have you all this morning for this discussion. I'm going to go ahead and not waste any time and kick it off to our presenting sponsor, Spectrum. Stephanie Murnieks is here to give us more details. Thanks, Steph.
Yep, thanks, Jess, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Government Spotlight series. My name is Stephanie Murnieks. I am the local manager of government affairs for Charter Communications in Columbus. You know Charter better by our suite of connectivity services, Spectrum. Chamber's Government Spotlight series seeks to connect businesses with policymakers and in turn elevate the voice of our region's business community. Charter is a longtime supporter of the Government Spotlight series, and we're thrilled to be with you today. We're grateful for the Chamber's mission to help the Columbus region grow and thrive. And at Charter, we support that mission by investing in infrastructure, technology, and people powering the future, all of which expands the crucial connectivity that empowers opportunity throughout Central Ohio. As we all know, broadband internet access is more important than ever to education, employment, healthcare, and daily life. Yet too many households and businesses, especially among vulnerable communities and in rural areas, still lack access or have not adopted broadband internet services. Whether it's through Charter's ongoing efforts to build out our network to reach more unserved areas or driving adoption in served areas by partnering with school districts, libraries, governments, and housing providers to deliver broadband directly to residents, we know that collaboration between the public and private sectors will help get more people connected. We look forward to continuing to work with our region's leaders to advance this mission and the Chamber. And now I'd like to introduce Derrick Clay, CEO of New Visions Group. Derrick is also the chair of the Chamber's Government Affairs Steering Committee and sits on the board of directors. Derrick, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. We certainly appreciate you and everything that Charter does for our community. I want to welcome everybody to the July Government Spotlight. As Stephanie mentioned, I am Derrick Clay. I'm the chair of the Government Affairs Steering Committee for the Columbus Chamber. And on behalf of our president and CEO, Don DePiro, and our board of trustees, we definitely thank you for participating in this Government Spotlight. You know, your Government Affairs Steering Chamber Government Affairs Steering Committee is here to serve you. And that's the reason why that we put on these spotlights on a regular basis. And you are definitely going to learn a lot this morning about the Ohio State budget process and the things that took place in order for us to make sure that we have an operating budget for our state and the things that's going to enhance small business. So I just want to make a quick mention that we have a brand new Vice President of Government Relations for the Columbus Chamber. His name is Desmond Des Bryant, and we are so excited to welcome Des to the Columbus Chamber and look forward to all the work that he's going to be doing on your behalf. Just a quick review of the program. So I'm going to introduce Steve Tugend and Andy Shiflett here in just a moment with Kegler, Brown, Hill, and Ritter. And we will have a discussion about the budget process. We will introduce the Director Murnieks, who is going to talk through the budget process and talk about her role as Director of Budget and Management. And then we'll take some questions from the audience as well. So get your questions ready because this is going to be a wonderful, wonderful program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Steve Tugend.
Thank you very much, Derrick, and it's a pleasure to be on this call with you. You have served the chamber very admirably and diligently in your capacity as chair of the Government Affairs Steering Committee. I want to welcome everyone from the chamber to this to this event. I am accompanied by my trusted colleague, Andy Shiflett. By way of background, Andy served as the legislative liaison for the Ohio Office of Budget and Management throughout the Kasich administration. He lobbied on every single one of Governor Kasich's budgets. Back then, Director Murnieks, they also did mid-biennium reviews, so he had his hands full almost every single year having a budget-related bill to lobby on, and we are thrilled to have him as a part of our team. And Andy candidly has forgotten more about the budget process than I'll ever know, and we really rely on him, his expertise and his thoughts to help our clients. Turning to the order of today's business, we really want to talk about House Bill 110, which was the biennial operating budget. The budget was, I would call the budget actually was a conventionally passed budget in unconventional times. Of course, we saw ourselves in the throes of the pandemic through much of the process of the budget. Very definitely the numbers that the revenue projections that we were seeing as a state were adversely affected, and therefore they were affecting our budget. Obviously, things were and are getting better. Ultimately, the bill was introduced in the first quarter of this year and ultimately passed by both chambers at the end of June. I was impressed with the legislative process. There were a number of question marks about certain items as they got inserted and were negotiated. I was impressed by how you had individual members and the House and the Senate taking stands on issues that were very important to them, but then ultimately coming to the negotiating table with the administration in almost every single circumstance, taking a very realistic position. And there was a lot of compromise in this budget and consensus building. And so much so that in spite of the fact that the early versions of the budget passed by the House and the Senate, not as introduced, Director, by the DeWine administration, but passed by the House and the Senate initially, really had a lot of red flags and were not all that bipartisan in their approach. At the end, when the Senate and the House negotiated the final result of the budget with the administration through what's called a conference committee process, ultimately we saw the budget pass by a significant bipartisan majority in both chambers. In fact, I believe there was only one state senator out of 33 that actually voted no on the final version of the budget as produced by the conference committee report, which is pretty remarkable, a pretty remarkable result considering where things began. And that's because everyone came to the table, in my view, and the House, the Senate, the administration, in good faith and worked out their differences. Candidly, our leaders in Washington, D.C. could take a page or two from the process that we saw here in Columbus among our elected leaders and the public servants that serve us in that process. It was truly remarkable. We had many clients that were expressing all kinds of concerns that eventually went away or were really mollified as the process, as the budget went through process. I do want to highlight a couple things that we worked on at the chamber. First and foremost was a very delicate situation involving the collection of municipal income tax on employees who, while their official place of business where they were hired and where they had been working prior to the pandemic had been in one location, presumably in your larger cities. Due to the pandemic and working from home, many of them were doing that, working from home, and therefore there was a real question mark about the ability of those municipalities where they had been working to collect taxes on them. Now, for a long time, this issue was being decided by a separate piece of legislation, but ultimately a compromise was folded into the state's operating budget. It was a compromise that first and foremost insulated our employers from unneeded and unnecessary liability potentially from taxpayer-related claims and liability about improper withholding and similar possible allegations against them. And then secondly, it provided a little bit of clarity in terms of for the taxpayer, and for that matter, for our cities. And we do need, the Columbus Chamber believes very much in strong cities. It provided more clarity in terms of withholding and the ability of the taxpayers during the tax year of 2021 to be able to get refunds. It was a good compromise. The chamber worked behind the scenes on that. There was also a major issue that arose in the Senate regarding an issue that's very important to our region, which is affordable housing. There was a provision that was inserted in the budget by the Senate that would have created some very disastrous results in our view in terms of the ability to generate affordable housing. It was a tax treatment that was provided to those that received federally subsidized housing tenants. And a compromise was worked on that, and the objections to that language were removed. It was a very successful outcome. And as a result of that, a priority of our community in providing more affordable housing was not undercut through the state's operating budget. There's no question that the task at hand in terms of balancing the budget, which is clearly something that Director Murnieks it was first and foremost of her concerns. It got a little bit easier as revenue projections continued to build through the year, and the fiscal picture got rosier as time progressed, and that was wonderful to see. And then ultimately we were able to see, honestly, the bill went to the governor's desk. There were a relatively small number of line item vetoes that the governor provided. I think it was a fairly mild number and depth of line item vetoes that he provided. And that, I believe, is a direct result of the successful conference committee process that our budget went through. I don't want to get into the details of the budget because I want the director, the expert in the room, to provide those details. So we will turn it over to her. I want to present to you Director Kimberly Murnieks. She has been a loyal and diligent servant of the state of Ohio for a number of years. She was one of Governor DeWine's first picks to be in his cabinet. She serves as the director of the Office of Budget and Management. She is the Chief Financial Officer for the state of Ohio. And prior to that, she served as the Chief Operating Officer to then Attorney General DeWine during his tenure, 8-year tenure as Attorney General of the state of Ohio. She also has in-depth budgetary experience prior to that with the Ohio Department of Education, but actually started off her tenure where she in state government, where she is right now at the Office of Budget Management. So it's really come full circle for her. She she's a member of Mensa, and she is also active with Girl Scouts and a fine organization that both of our daughters were active in when they were going through school, and so near and dear to my heart. With that, I want to, with no further ado, I want to turn it over to Director Kimberly Murnieks, who is going to then present on the budget. Director, welcome.
Well, thank you. I am very excited to be here today to talk about this budget. I'm going to share my screen. I have a short presentation, so hopefully everyone can see that now. As you mentioned, this was a budget that it was a good process, and it was a process where we got the budget done on time. That opening slide, that's a picture of Governor DeWine as we were finalizing the budget at about 11:50 something p.m. on June 30th. So we were very pleased with the outcome of this process, and it was bipartisan. The administration and the House and the Senate all worked together to put together a budget that I think it meets the moment. It is the right priorities for Ohioans and our business community as we move forward post-pandemic. So I'll just give kind of an overview. I have this first slide that is a process overview. You mentioned a bit about the process already, but just to talk about the OBM role in the budgeting process, we actually started working on this budget about a year ago. So last July, we put out guidance to our state agencies. Agencies started working with stakeholder groups, prepared budget requests, and then submitted those to OBM. The governor, of course, introduced his budget February 1st, and the legislative process then proceeded throughout the spring until we got to July 1st, and a happy fiscal new year. I'll talk a little bit about where we ended fiscal year 21, because I think this is a tremendous story. Ohio had a very conservative approach and a proactive approach to managing both the pandemic and all of the economic outcomes related to it, all of the challenges. And we approached it with a very conservative management philosophy. And I am very pleased to report that we were able to navigate all of the uncertainties around this last biennium and close fiscal year 21 with state tax revenues $1.5 billion over estimate. And those were not pessimistic post-pandemic estimates. Those were the actual estimates as they were produced 2 years ago when we put the previous budget together prior to any inkling of what was to come. So a tremendous story. And we also ended below spending estimates. So our revenues were over estimate, our expenditures were below, and that put us in a very strong position. I have a couple of sections highlighted on this slide. Those are the both categories of our state sales tax performed very strong throughout the year, and that drove about $1 billion of that revenue overage. So now I'll switch to the new biennial budget. We've formulated this budget with kind of 3 major pillars that all work together and are interconnected in order to produce a strong Ohio. And we looked at this budget as really truly investing in the future of our state. And it starts with healthy people, a healthy workforce, so that we have the ability to produce all of the outputs and outcomes that we rely on for our economic growth. And we also invest in renewed communities. I'll talk a little bit about each of these in a little more detail, but healthy people plus renewed communities will equal the thriving economy that we are already seeing in Ohio as we work through this post-pandemic recovery. So the total, this is the pie chart of the state's general revenue fund appropriations as finalized in the budget. This is the 2-year total. It's about $50 billion in state GRF. And you can see the largest slice of state general revenue fund spending is primary and secondary education, always a priority, critical priority, and was a focus point in this budget. Following that, Medicaid, higher education, of course, and the justice and protection programs and health and human services. So these are kind of the major slices of the state budget. And one point I like to make when I talk about all of the categories of spending is the vast majority of this, $50 billion in general fund, $80 billion per year in all funds spending. The vast majority is not spent in state government in Columbus on the operations of state government. 90% of the state budget is spent all around the state on our schools, on our healthcare system, on our higher education system, supporting our local government, supporting our business community. So when you think of the state budget, it's really not about Columbus. It's really not about state employees. It's really about all of Ohio. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the priorities that are funded in the budget, and then I know what we really want to get to today is some question and good discussion. But talked about healthy people as kind of the foundation. We can't have a strong Ohio unless we have strong communities and strong workforce, and that starts with the health of our people. That the pandemic has proven the critical link between the health of our citizens and our economy. So this budget invests in assisting our local health department and invests in women and babies, and through the Help Me Grow program, one of Governor DeWine's main priorities. It addresses lead hazards in our communities, ridding our housing and our pipes of lead. We know that is a tremendous issue in communities throughout Ohio. It continues Recovery Ohio. That is the program that Governor DeWine started to address the issues with substance use around the state. It also increases access to tobacco use and prevention and cessation. If you look at the detail of our state revenues, one of the categories that is significantly up this year are tobacco tax receipts. And frankly, that is not a category of our tax revenues that I like to see increase, because we saw that smoking increase throughout the pandemic. And so we have part of our budget to address that. It also invests in mental health initiatives, including in our prisons, because we want to make sure that when those that are incarcerated leave prisons, which most of them do, and return to our communities, we want to make sure that they are ready to enter the workforce, ready to be productive citizens. And we know that the vast majority of those that are incarcerated have mental health and substance use issues. And so this budget addresses that. It continues to focus on K-12 wellness as part of the new school funding system, and it focuses on outcomes in our Medicaid system. Communities are a major focus in the budget, rebuilding our communities, building communities that are strong and ready for economic development and ready for the future. It expands Governor DeWine's H2 Ohio initiative. It funds the next 2 years of that multi-year program to ensure that Ohio has access to clean water resources. We know that one of the main issues around the nation is access to water, and that will be a future issue, not just in Ohio, but around the country. And we know that having access and protecting those resources will position us for a strong economy as we move through these upcoming decades. We also invest in broadband, a The new Broadband Ohio program has a $250 million investment in the budget. We also invest in renewing our communities through both demolitions of blight, $150 million for those programs, and redevelopment of brownfields. It's, you know, we all know in all of the communities, no matter where we live, there are issues with blight, issues with brownfields that hold back our communities from the strength that we know that their economic futures can be. And so this will really help us turn that corner and address those issues, especially in some of our smaller and medium-sized communities. There's also support for law enforcement initiatives, body cams, violent crime reduction, assistance for recruiting, and investments in our school safety center and our narcotics intelligence center. Those are resources at our Department of Public Safety that can assist local law enforcement throughout the state and really share critical information. The budget also assists food banks and older Ohioans and children's services. So there's a lot in this budget. It's 2,000 and plus pages, about 2,400 pages. So this is just a quick overview, and I want to switch now to what I know you are probably almost interested in, the economic investments in the budget. So a key provision is the personal income tax cut for all Ohioans so that our citizens keep more of their hard-earned money and can continue to spur our economic growth. It also assists businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic, and my next slide will have some details around that because I know some of you are probably very interested in that. It also invests in tech cred. This is the program where we get workers into those programs where they can get credentials for in-demand jobs, and we expand that credentialing program in our K-12 schools. So students, while they're in high school, can earn credentials for in-demand jobs and be job ready right after high school graduation. We also continue investments in some of our successful programs like the export internships and our diversity and inclusion internships. The budget expands access to affordable childcare, which we know is important for especially women to be able to be productive in the workforce. And it expands and prioritizes our higher education scholarship programs, especially focused on college affordability through the Ohio College Opportunity Grant and the STEM fields through the Choose Ohio First scholarship. So a little detail on the business assistance in the budget. There's $200 million in the budget, plus there were actually some bills that were passed in May to get a jump start on getting some of these revenues out the door quickly. So these totals include those May bills plus House Bill 110, the budget. So there's $200 million for food and beverage establishments. There's $50 million for the lodging industry and $40 million for entertainment venues. And those are all grants of up to $30,000 per business. And there's $20 million set aside for new small businesses that started up in 2020. So these are new businesses that, you know, had maybe the unfortunate timing of starting up right at the beginning or in the midst of the global pandemic. So we want to provide them some assistance and a boost. These grant applications for all 4 of these programs are open right now. You can go to the Department of Development's website, businesshelp.ohio.gov, and you can apply for those today. And we're on a rolling basis getting those grants out the door, my team working in coordination with the Ohio Department of Development. There's also $150 million for the small business grants. These were grants that the application window was actually open last fall and through December. We had more applicants than we had appropriations to fund. And so the budget provided an additional $150 million so we can fund all of those applications that were received through December. For more details about the budget, there's a lot more information on the OBM website. If you go to budget.ohio.gov, you can find the fact sheets that have more detail about each of these priority pillars that I talked about. And You can also keep up to date on all of the state's financial information. If you don't already subscribe, I encourage you to go to our website and sign up to get the OBM monthly financial report that is put out each month on the 10th day of the month. It provides a recap of state revenues and spending, but more importantly, it provides an in-depth analysis of both the national and global and state economic picture. So there's lots of economic indicators in real time, up to date as of that published date each month. So if you're not already a subscriber, sign up to get our OBM monthly financial report. Before I turn to questions, I just wanted to talk a few minutes about the Federal American Rescue Plan Act. These are the dollars that were approved by Congress in March. There are both state and local relief funds coming into the state of Ohio, and House Bill 168, which was enacted on June 29th, it's a busy week that week in Columbus, allocated $2.2 billion of those recovery funds so that we can start getting those federal funds out into our Ohio communities. So it included $84 million for pediatric behavioral health infrastructure. That is to help our children's hospitals build their infrastructure. We know even prior to the pandemic, pediatric behavioral health was a focus issue for Governor DeWine and the General Assembly. And the pandemic has exacerbated that need. And so there's $84 million for that priority. There's $250 million of our state ARPA relief funds are being provided to communities around the state for sewer and water projects. So this application window will open at the in the next couple of weeks, and communities around the state will be able to apply for water projects and sewer projects again, so that we can make sure that our communities are have all the resources to be development ready. And we know that there are many communities around our state that don't have access to those water systems, and so we want to improve that, and these dollars will help there. And we are using 1.5 billion roughly of our state share of these federal relief dollars to pay off the unemployment insurance trust fund advancement from the federal government. So that is important, so that debt is not hanging over our businesses, not hanging over our economy and our state as we move through recovery. That was an issue following the recession last decade that really was a kind of a long-term multi-year drag. And so we want to deal with that immediately. And so we will be using these dollars to pay off that loan. There's also some of the local dollars flow through the state. And so the initial $422 million for our smaller local communities, our small cities, villages, and townships, that was also appropriated in House Bill 168. So with that, happy fiscal new year, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Director Murnieks. We certainly appreciate you and your presentation and the flawless budget process. We will get to a few questions from the audience. I do have a quick one for you just to kick things off. What's been the biggest challenge for OBM in forecasting revenue in the pandemic?
That is a great question. I think the challenge was just related to the uncertainty. So we knew early on when there was a novel coronavirus identified in China, when there were measures that were being taken in Asia to contain the virus very early on in January and February of 2020, we knew that would have an impact on our state revenues, that it would have an impact, even if we never saw coronavirus on our shores or in our state, that it would impact supply chains. So we took steps very early on to mitigate that impact on our state budget by slowing hiring as early as last February. We then, of course, did more direct measures in March and again in May as we put on specific spending controls, required budget reductions. So we tightened our belt because we knew that the revenue picture would be quite uncertain as the pandemic continued to expand and really affect all aspects of of global life. So that uncertainty was quite a challenge. There were no really strong macroeconomic models that were useful in that kind of a situation because there had been no, there hadn't been a global pandemic in 100 years that to this magnitude. And so all of them, the models were really based on kind of more limited pandemic type disruptions. And so we were working with economists, really looking at indicators as it was unfolding. And the econometric models were continuously being updated. We were looking, we were every single month updating our internal projections and then using that information to assess the state budget and the spending plans. So we put together, of course, our state budget had to be introduced February 1st, which means all of the decision-making internal to the administration had to happen in January. So our revenue forecast was completed in December. If you rewind to December, it was the height of the coronavirus caseloads throughout the state and throughout the country. Vaccine rollout, the week that we finalized our budget, I think like 30,000 people in Ohio had received a COVID vaccine. So it was just, the first weeks we did not know the efficacy at that point and really the dramatic efficacy of the vaccines that we've seen play out in recent months. And so there was a lot of uncertainty. And so our forecasts at OBM are always conservative, and we were even more purposefully conservative given all of the goings on at that point in time. We also, that was it was post CARES Act federal stimulus, but there were 2 more rounds of federal stimulus that happened after we finalized our budget forecast. The package that happened in December at the end of the Trump administration, and then the American Rescue Plan Act in March, which happened after our budget was introduced. And so the stimulus related to the stimulating effects of those bills were not included in our original budget forecast. We did then update our forecast, of course, in June for the conference committee, and it was happily much more, I guess, positive. All of what we call the upside risks of the forecast that we had talked about when we introduced the budget, all of the positive upsides happened. And so the forecast update in June was quite positive, very robust. Revenues were received, and especially in that final quarter of fiscal year 21, April, May, and June saw state revenues exceeding estimates by historic. We set records for the sales taxes during those months. So that all of those things combining led us to have a very positive update that I think did facilitate very positive process in conference committee and enabled the bipartisan budget that we have today.
Thank you very much, Director. And I want to remind everyone that's watching that you can certainly put your questions in the chat. We're looking for any questions that you may have. I have one more question that has come to us, Director, via email that I'm going to read to you. It says, and it has to do with spending. It says, during your testimony before the House Bill before House Bill 110 Conference Committee, you stated that OBM's revised revenue estimates projected an additional $3 billion over prior estimates. What are the DeWine administration's plans for allocation of the surplus revenue? And can you describe the anticipated transfers that will be made from the fiscal year 21 fiscal year ending balance?
Sure. Yes. Great question. There are several. First of all, when we look at that surplus, because of some of the things that I've talked about already briefly, but when we looked at those revenues and we looked at the, especially both categories of the sales tax and those historic revenues that were received in fiscal year 21, we know that those revenues were boosted by pandemic effects. On the one hand, you had the effects of the federal stimulus just on overall consumer spending. And secondly, we saw a shift throughout the pandemic away from services, which are largely untaxed in Ohio, and towards goods. So not only were people across Ohio spending those stimulus dollars in Ohio, but they were also spending them largely on taxable goods. And so those are both trends that we expect to wane as the federal stimulus works its way through the economy. And we expect as the economy recovers that people will, and we've already seen this trend start in the data that have since come out, people are spending more on services now. And so we plan for that by not spending that fiscal year 21 surplus on propping up ongoing future government new ongoing programs, but instead on one-time investments, some of the things that I mentioned earlier, the $250 million for broadband, the $150 million for demolitions, the $350 million for community infrastructure and brownfields. So those are all what we look at as one-time spending that can really enable us to pay dividends and develop economically in the long term. We also used some of that one-time revenue to put into a Medicaid reserve. One of the big, talk about uncertainties, one of the big uncertainties always in a state budget is what are the Medicaid caseloads going to be? That's a big driver of both state and federal spending. And so we, in this budget, transfer $1.2 billion into a Medicaid reserve so that we can deal with that peak in enrollment that we're seeing right now without it being a drag on the overall state budget. So again, very conservative practices, looking at spending one-time revenue on one-time investments, but that will pay dividends in the future.
Thank you, Director. We have another question from the chat. It says, you discussed healthy people and mental health initiatives, and you also mentioned including our prison populations. Can you talk more about what's being done to prepare them for reentry into the community and to the workforce?
Sure, I can talk about it from a budget perspective. Of course, I'm not the programmatic expert, but one thing that we know is that our prison population has mental health needs and substance use needs that we need to address while they are incarcerated so that they are prepared for reentry. And so this budget increases by about $30 million, the state investment into those programs. And it's a partnership between our Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services and the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. And so the priority is to ensure that the treatment is available for those for our citizens while they are incarcerated so that they are ready to reenter. And I'm not the programmatic expert, so I can't speak to the specifics of exactly how those dollars are going to be spent, but it will ensure that there are programs in our prisons to provide those services.
Great. Thanks again, Director. Another question from the chat. Did the governor's Student Wellness and Success Program get funded as a dedicated pot of funding, or did it become rolled into a new student funding formula?
So that is a great question. The governor's priority, of course, around education, K-12 education, is to ensure that there are funds specifically for student and wellness and success so that students are ready to learn. We know, and study after study shows, that if students aren't ready to learn, if they don't have those supports, mental health and all of the other wellness related items, that they won't be successful during the school day. So the new school funding formula, the bipartisan school funding formula, does include the calculation. It does include student wellness and success in the new formula. So it embeds it, instead of it being outside of the formula, it embeds it in the formula, which we think is positive for the long-term support of those programs. But it includes requirements that those funds be spent on those services. So it doesn't roll the dollars in and just kind of lose track of them and allow schools to spend it on anything. They do have to spend those dollars on those priorities. So again, it was a work between the administration and the General Assembly to ensure that that priority was encompassed in the final school funding formula product.
Great, thank you, Director. Another question from our President and CEO. Kim, are you aware of any specific funding for small businesses, and how can our Columbus Chamber assist you?
Sure. The funding for businesses are some of those that I outlined, those coronavirus recovery dollars. And you can help us by ensuring that your members are aware. Those, again, are open and available right now. And we want to make sure that the word is out and that our businesses are applying for those. We want to make sure that those dollars get to those that need them, because we know that it has been a hard year and a half for many. And when we approached how to spend the federal relief funding and some of our state one-time dollars, we didn't spend it to expand state government. We're spending those dollars to help those who have been impacted by the pandemic.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat. We probably have time for maybe 2 more questions. We'll go to about 10:55 so we can get you guys back to your day. Director, we have a question regarding Medicaid. So what are the major objectives of the DeWine Administration's Medicaid procurement? Was one of the objectives cost containment?
That's a great question. We the objectives are to ensure that the program is focused on outcomes, that it is flexible to meet the needs of individuals. And so when the Department of Medicaid worked through the re-procurement process, those were key priorities. And that is, as we move into the next phase, cost containment, of course, if we are doing all of those things correctly, then yes, we expect to see reduced costs. A part of the overall re-procurement process is a single pharmacy benefit manager and just more and additional personalized services. And so so that's the overall goal of the re-procurement.
Good deal. Thank you. Thank you again. Any last questions that we have? Those were the questions that I had. If there are no other questions, we want to definitely thank you, Director, for your time. Thank you to Steve Tugend and Andy Shiflett for your assistance, from Kegler, Brown, Hill, and Ritter. Thank you, Spectrum, for your sponsorship. And I just want to make sure that our president and CEO, give him an opportunity to say any parting words as we get back to our day. So I'm going to turn it over to Don DePiro.
Thanks, Derrick. You know, that's always dangerous because I never met a microphone I didn't like, of course. Kim, thank you so much. That was excellent. And I know all of you join me, as Derrick said earlier, in welcoming Desmond Bryant, who starts on Monday as our new Vice President of Government Relations. He's got extensive experience in the community. He was a top aide to Sandra Williams when she was both in the legislature and the Senate. He has wonderful relationships with our city council members, our county commissioners, and in the State House. So please, starting Monday, join me in welcoming Des to our chamber family. I want to thank all of you. I especially want to thank Derrick. Derrick not only chairs our Government Affairs Steering Committee, but he also led the selection process for our new Government Affairs Vice President. And it was an excellent process, an extraordinarily thorough process. And we had a number of wonderful finalists for the position. Also, for the last 3 months, it was back to the future for Steve Tugend. Steve was our Vice President of Government Relations in the early 2000s at the chamber, and he and his colleagues at Kegler, Brown, Hill, and Ritter stepped up, and for 3 months have been on contract with us to be our contract Vice President of Government Relations. Steve, thank you so much, as to all the members of our Government Affairs Steering Committee who are with us this morning. So again, Kim, thank you very much. Derrick, your leadership has been unparalleled. We can't thank you enough for all of your tireless work and volunteer efforts for our chamber. And thanks to all of you for joining us this morning. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.